Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 19 of Tour of Japan, the review series of course for the Super GT machines of GT6. And in this episode we're featuring an Nsx Jgtc model. This is one of the earlier shape JGTC machines that are featured on the game. It's from the year 2000, and this is the Team Castrol Mugen NSX. This is a GT500 class vehicle, and it's one of the slightly less powerful GT500 cars. Now, it's still a powerful car, it still produces 856 horsepower, but that's around 40 to 50 horsepower less than many of the other newer NSXs, both premium and non-premium. So what does this have to offer? Because if it has less spec, surely it's going to be slower. Well, yes and no, because it does have a lower spec, and in some ways it is slightly slower. The top speed, for instance, as any of you who watched this morning's top speed video for this car will have seen, is slightly slower. The top speed is just over 220, compared to most of the other NSXs around 230 minimum. So yeah, for top speed, it will fall behind if you get up to those kind of speeds. But most JGTC races don't get up to those kind of speeds. The highest speeds you'll get to on most JGTC related tracks would probably be here at Fuji. And even on this track, you only get up around generally 200, 210 at best. And that's if you're running a low downforce setting. So those kind of speeds very rarely come into real use. So that lack doesn't really mean all that much in the broad scheme of things. But getting back to the car's spec, it uses a similar engine to the other NSXs, less powerful as we said, but similar spec, 3.5 litre, mid-mounted of course. It produces 513 pound-feet of torque, which is not too far behind some of the other NSXs, and it weighs 1,150 kilos, which pretty much breaks even with most of the other JGTC machines. Now the PP on this one is slightly lower, and as I've mentioned in my review videos before, that can sometimes be a good thing, because it sits at 645, and the 650 PP level is a pretty competitive one, and this car naturally sits just under that. And at that level, it is a very competitive car, primarily against other racing cars, because obviously you can get vehicles like the Tomicara ZZ2 or the Nissan GTR at that level, and they have advantages of things like NOS, etc., and significantly higher top speeds. But if you're putting this up against other racing cars, it's a very competitive car. Now the power to weight ratio per tonne is really what suffers the most on this model. Now it's still not bad, I don't want to give a bad impression of this car, but the power to weight is significantly lower than many of the other JGTC cars because of course, having less power, but being still one of the heavier class models. It produces 744 horsepower per tonne, which is far from unimpressive, but you need to know that it's not quite as high as some of the others, NSX or otherwise. Now in terms of all-round ability, this car, contrary to what its specs may suggest, I would say is actually a very good machine. The handling is more focused, I would say. The turn-in feels more sharp on this particular NSX than on the Mobile 1 NSX, for instance, or some of the newer models, which tend to have a little bit of understeer, and then they have a sudden snap oversteer because of their odd weight distribution compared to stuff like the Supra and the Skyline. And as I've mentioned before in my NSX reviews, it is one of the trickier JGTC cars to master. This car, though, I would say is one of the easier NSXs to get a hold of, not just because it has less power to cope with, but also because it actually does feel different to drive. The handling is notably different, and the overall personality of the car doesn't really feel like an NSX, to be honest. It actually feels like a completely unique machine in its own right. The handling is... It's hard to explain really, but it's completely different to all of the other NSXs. The front end is much more loose and more playful overall. You can really throw the car into corners, whereas with most NSXs you don't do that. With the NSX, usually the handling is very much about flow and stopping the car from that snap oversteer that they're used to doing. This car, though, doesn't do that so much. It can happen, of course, but overall it feels much more playful, for want of a better word, than many of the other NSXs. And at 750,000 credits, it's one of the more moderately priced JGTC models, along a similar price to many of the other earlier generation Super GT machines that are on the game. So overall, if you're looking for a pure straight line monster, well, perhaps not. But if you're looking for a slightly more beginner-friendly and easier to manage JGTC model, particularly for handling and grip-based tracks, this is a very good model. So that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.